You're listening to 10 Points, a podcast with your hosts, Ash and Nicholas, where all the talk is Canadian Highlander, our favorite format from the best trading card game ever, Magic the Gathering.
Hey everyone, it's me, Ash.
And me, Nicholas.
Today we are going to be responding to a community question and talking about Manabases.
But first, we need to get to our best card from, and today our set is Urza's Legacy.
So, Nick, we've already talked about Urza's Saga, I believe, and there were some pretty cool cards there. But this set, I think, had a lot of other stuff that all went into Paradox Academy. Did you notice that?
A lot of it does. Mike, the card that I picked actually doesn't.
Which is?
Yeah, good segue. Karmic Guide. I don't necessarily know if it's the best card in the set, but it is a very big part of what enables 4-color Kiki Pod to exist as a deck. And so I feel like I would be betraying it just a little bit if I didn't mention it, because for people that don't know, it's a very big part of the pod chains that make the deck what it is.
Now, I did not see that when I was going through this set. For some reason, I thought, I don't know, I have no explanation. I thought that I didn't realize that was in the set. Well, My best card, first off, I agree. It's also just good even when you're not comboing with it for some reason.
Oh, yeah.
My best card is a card that you play in Paradox Academy. It is Crop Rotation, notably on the points list. And I've been seeing this card do insane things when that insane thing was just get Ancient Tomb.
Yeah, fair crop rotation is still busted crop rotation.
Yeah, like there's just so many valuable lands, which you will hear about later in this episode. And
foreshadowing.
And I think that, it's just a super powerful card. A couple, well, there were a lot of honorable mentions, but two I wanted to make note of is, well, Karmic Guide's good, but Mother of Runes is also good in those creature decks. And Miscalculation is good for interactive decks.
Yep, and
just trying to share the love.
Good for artifact decks.
Yeah,
if you have points to spare.
I'd have to agree. So before we jump into it, I do want to say a thank you to Wonky Wombat. He is in the 10 Points Discord server and prompted this. It wasn't initially as a question, but more of a comment. But we decided to take it and run. So he was asking exactly what we play in, what kind of lands we play, and wait, I think I'm looking at the wrong question. Is it the wrong person?
Yeah.
It is Rubber Duck Sauce.
Yeah,
it was Rubber Duck Sauce.
Literally, you said that, and I opened up Discord because I was like, I am 99% sure that's not correct.
Thank you to Wonky Wombat for being a active member of the community, though.
Yeah, and also thanks Rubber Duck Sauce for being an active member of the community. And to be fair, it was phrased as a question, just maybe not as explicitly explained, but I at least understood that it was a question of, is this something you guys want to talk about on the podcast? Yeah,
they just said, they made an observation that an underexplored part of Commander is the mana bases. And then they asked, do we have any hard or fast rules on how we build mana bases for our decks? So that's what we're going to be talking about today. The things that we take into account when building mana bases and how we go about it.
Yeah, mana bases are one of those things that, looking at it from just an outside perspective, it's pretty simple. You put lands in your deck so that you can make mana and cast your spells. But minor changes in mana bases can completely shift how competitive a deck is, and getting the balance between what kinds of lands you're playing, how many lands you're playing, it can really, really impact how your deck is going to perform.
Yeah, I think it's also one of those things that you don't even notice a mana base until it stops working or until it's not working. A good mana base, you won't even notice it. It'll just work.
Something that I'll see a lot is people complaining about how they're constantly getting mana screwed, and they're like, oh my goodness, if I could just draw this color of mana, this game would have been totally different. And then I look at their mana base and I'm like, well, yeah, you're playing 3 red cards, but you're playing 10, a quarter of your lands are produce red mana. If you cut down on that there's so many changes that you can make to your deck to ensure to the best of your ability that your draws will consistently have the mana to do what you need them to do.
Casually adding a card to our list because I forgot it. I agree that a lot of times people just kind of throw the lands they have that are multicolored and then match the colors into a deck without too much regard for the distribution that they need. But that's kind of what we're going to talk about here. Oh, you're adding another one too.
Yeah.
You're spelling it wrong.
I don't care.
Okay. Anyways, so first thing we were going to talk about is the land counts, how many lands we play. I think we can just kind of breeze through this part kind of quickly, but because this is more of a general guideline than a strict number. But it depends on the type of deck you're playing. Nick, you can agree or disagree with me on these. For me personally, for green mid-range decks, I'm usually playing between 36 and 37.
Exactly for blue the same for me.
For blue, do you have these written down?
What, numbers?
Yeah, or do you just have them in your head?
But if I'm building a green mid-range deck, I have a green mid-range deck together right now, and it has 37 lands.
Perfect. I have blue mid-range decks, specifically mid-range decks that are blue and not green. Are usually 30, like they're 35 to 37. Sometimes they go a bit lower if I'm playing a high cantrip count, which I tend to do.
I might be on a little bit more than that, but like only like maybe like 35 to 36.
You mean a little less?
No, you said like 35
to 37.
Oh, I heard like, okay.
It probably just cut out.
Yeah. I agree.
For cantrip heavy control decks, I'll play 38 usually. And ones that are a little lighter on cantrips, I'll add one more. Where are you at? Pretty close to there?
Yeah.
Yeah. Again, I typically prefer to play high numbers of cantrips. Though I feel like we're getting to a meta where it's too slow to do that. For combo decks that are artifact based, which usually means they're playing Soul Ring or Mana Crypt in the point spread, and Tolarian Academy and Ancient Tomb and Soul lands, I am going to be playing. I play a little lower than most people, but between 27 and 31. 27 is extremely greedy.
Yeah, I'm usually more like 30 to 33 kind of range for those.
Well, who gets mana screwed more playing those decks? It's me. It's me.
Yeah. I mean, hey, you gotta have the high roll potential, you know?
I quite like that. So, you know. And then for Creature Toolbox decks, which me and Nicholas have been known to play recently. Well, Nicholas all the time, me more recently. I play pretty close to mid-range numbers, sometimes a bit more. On the maybe as high as 38, but usually between 36 and 37, because you're playing more mana dorks than usual, but you also have a higher than average mana curve.
Yeah, those decks are super mana hungry. So while you're playing a ton of mana dorks, you really don't want to drop too much on the land. So I'm usually around like 36 for those kinds of decks. Yeah,
and even when one of those lands is Gaia's Cradle, you're still playing that many.
Oh yeah.
So that's just kind of an idea. There are, like, in aggro decks, you're going to be playing fewer because your mana curve is going to be lower on average. But I don't have good numbers for aggro decks. I feel like the aggro decks is kind of dependent on the list.
Yeah, aggro decks are going to be like generally like lower 30s, like
probably
low,
like
low
33 default, 33 to 35 ish.
Yeah.
Unless you're playing Affinity and you're me, in which case you're playing 29.
I mean, yeah, in Affinity you don't need lands. Your spells are free because you already have artifacts that lower your Affinity.
That's true. Now, we kind of already talked about this a little bit, but we'll talk we'll touch on it to be clear. On what types of things affect the number of lands you play. Go ahead.
There's like a number of things. I mean, you really want to be considering like how you're going to be getting these lands. So like if your deck, like we talked about, if your deck is playing a lot of cantrips, it's going to be easier for you to find lands, because if you have like a 2-land hand that has a ponder in it, then you'll probably be able to find that third land, as opposed to where if you are just playing normal, like a deck that's not playing cantrips and you have a 2-land deck or 2-land hand, then you really have to consider, like, am I going to be able to straight draw into this other land? So cantrips can usually lower your land count, or at least let you be a little more greedy with your keeps. Mana dorks, like we talked about, are a big factor.
That is mostly, mana dorks are mostly affect your land count when you are trying to power something out, but not trying to continue up the curve that much. Like if you're trying to power out a 3 or 4 drop, but you're not trying to get to 6 and 7 mana. That's when I think mana dorks will affect your land count more.
Yeah. Mana dorks, like if you're playing a mid-range deck that's playing mana dorks, you can maybe kind of lower your land count, but if you're playing like big green or something, like mono green Stompy. Well, Hoof generally plays a pretty low land count because you're on an extremely large amount of dorks.
I mean, I still play like 35.
That's fair. Yeah.
Because you want to hit your land drops as well, otherwise dorks don't do anything.
Yeah. Playing a dork and then missing your, like, playing 2 lands and a dork and then missing your 3rd land drop, you're really not that much further ahead, apart from the fact that now your land can die to bolt.
Another thing that affects the number of lands you play is ramp, like non-creature ramp, and what types of that you were playing. And Nicholas, you were getting ready to talk about that.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of the time you're going to see that in the form of artifacts, like we talked about. So Paradox, Eggs, Affinity, other artifact decks. But there are some ramp decks, as well as the medium decks that really abuse some of that low cost ramp and
some other decks that'll. Sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off. Are you done?
Oh, I was just gonna say they can play slightly less lands because of that.
Mm-hmm. Some non-artifact ramp non-creature non-artifact ramp you'll see is some certain decks will play like Farseeks and Nature's Lures. I think the most common decks that play those kind of things are like either lands decks that like are trying to get like larger numbers of lands in play for landfall effects or for Field of the Dead. But I've also seen them played in Super Friends decks that are trying to play like a large number of 4, 5, and 6 drops.
Yeah. They also go in blue-green taking extra turns, which is not a particularly good deck, but let me tell you, it is very fun to play. It's horrible to play against, but
yeah. And then another thing that affects the number of lands you play is, we already alluded to this, but your mana curve being higher up. So you're playing a higher number of 4, 5, and 6 drops. You're going to play more lands, even if you're playing ways to ramp, because you want to, in addition to ramping, you want to hit your land drops. Otherwise, your ramping is ineffective. You're just spending mana to get mana instead of spending a land drop to get it. And that's not particularly valuable a lot of the time. And I think one more thing that tends to affect your number of lands you're trying to play is your overall game plan. If you're trying to play a more controlling or mid-range game plan, you're looking to hit land drops a lot before getting like you want to get to 6 or 7 usually before you stop, where aggro decks, they're fine stopping at 3 or 4. So you want to set it up so you're drawing the right amount.
Yeah, you kind of want to think about it. Honestly, that's a really good way to think about it. How long does your deck want the game to go? Because generally, like if you're playing a control deck and you're wanting a long game, then you want to make sure that you're hitting lands so that you can like cast your spells throughout that game. But if you're like an aggro deck and you want the game to be done by turn 5, then really you don't need to hit more than 3.
Yeah, because every land you draw past your 4th land is a blank piece of cardboard. Except maybe on your Earthshaker Kenra, but you understand.
Yeah, I mean, Earthshaker Kenra, the Eternalize is more of a cherry on the top.
I was actually just thinking, this is a little side note, but yesterday I kind of resorted my collection and sorted out the tokens we use for Paperlander, so they're all alphabetized now, and I kind of consolidated it down to the ones we actually need. And I found the Earthshaker Kenra Eternalize token. And I was like, oh yeah, we need this. Everyone plays as Earthshaker Trainer. And then I was like, okay, but how often does that effect resolve and the game not end immediately?
I've done it. It
yeah,
has
me
happened.
too. I ended up leaving it in there, but just because, it was only taking up one slot, right? It wasn't like it was 12 soldier tokens. But it was like, it is kind of like, how often are we going to put this into play and then scoop up the cards?
Oh, there's a good chance that never comes into play on any Paperlanders. I wonder if it has.
Ty's played medium red at least once. I think twice.
All right, this is way off topic.
Yeah.
The next subject that we're talking about is basic lands. How many do you need to play? And while it might seem like, oh, I don't need to play hardly any basics, because if I play duels, then I can make more mana. Blood Moon and Price of Progress are very prevalent in this format, and every deck you build has to consider that possibility, as well as Path to Exile and Field of Ruin and
Assassin's Trophy.
There's a lot of, and now very, very relevant, the Initiative.
Yeah.
So basics do play a vital role.
I think the short answer to the question, how many basics do you play, is however many you can before it starts to be a detriment. As many as you can without it punishing you. Which I think is more than most people think.
Yeah, I generally never go lower than 2 on any deck.
Yeah. Well, there's one deck I do that. Well, for Eggs and Paradox, I'm usually on exactly 1. But those are kind of exceptions. I think in Blue-White Control, I was comparing deck lists with someone the other day, or a week ago, I guess, and their Blue-White list, I think, had a total of 9. It was 7 islands, 2 plains, and I was on 3 plains, 13 islands, for a total of 16 basics. Oh yeah, I love it.
Are you on back to basics?
No, I have too many. I fetch out too many duels.
Sure.
Because oddly with that deck, you fetch out duels early, and then you're happy to draw basics the rest of the game. You don't need to draw duels, broadly speaking. The only exception to that, usually, is if you need to fetch out your Underground Sea to flashback Mystical Teachings. Because you're fetching out a Triome very early, almost every game. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah.
But you're fine to just draw basics later, because by the time you're getting to that point, you have, you're only operating on 2 colors, and sometimes you need additional ones for Prismatic Ending. Or Leyline Binding.
Yeah. Basic count is kind of hard to give a number without seeing a list. But generally you want to look at how many double pip cards do you have? Obviously, how many colors is your deck? If you're on a 1 or 2 color deck, obviously you can play a lot of basics. Once you hit 3 colors, generally on a 3 color deck, I'm on at most 7 basics, but usually honestly less than that.
Going from 2 to 3 colors cuts your basic count by an insane amount.
By so much. And then 4 and 5 color decks, I'm almost always on 2, maybe 3.
Yeah, so right now in 4 color Initiative, well, Furiously Nightmare Slaying is my pet name for it. I'm on a swamp, a swamp, a plains, and a forest. So I'm playing all of them that aren't a mountain. The main reason for that is not to fetch them, but to get them with the Initiative. Because I couldn't play 4. That's too many. Basic mountains are literally the worst basic land at me. And you don't need the red as much. That's your least, your lowest pip color anyways. So I have those 3, so I have those options with the Initiative, and then that's all I'm playing. Because that deck, honestly, is pushing at playing 3.
Yeah, the Initiative has increased the importance of basics even more than they already were. Honestly, when you get into 4 and 5 color decks, you're really not beating Blood Moon or Price of Progress anyway. So you're not as much playing the basics to beat those. In a 3 color deck, you're playing the basics that if you're in that matchup, you can fetch them out. In a 4 and 5 color deck, that's just not going to happen. But there's Path to Exile, Field of Ruin, and now the Initiative as well as several other mechanics that allow you to search your library for a basic, and you really, really want to have a basic in your deck to get when those come up.
Yeah. It seems like a small thing, but the advantage you lose by not gaining that is pretty substantial.
Yeah, if your opponent Field of Ruins you and you don't have a basic, they are so far ahead because they get their basic, you lose a land, and you're just like so very far ahead. Behind, I
yeah. Mm-hmm. Another thing is that kind of affects how many basics you play is what colors you're in, I think. Like, I feel like decks that are more red heavy, like if there are 2 color decks that are pretty red, you don't actually mind playing as many red basics. I mean, you're going to play a decent amount, but you're probably going to play a few more. Like, red-black aggro plays more swamps than mountains often, because when you play your Blood Moon, all your duels become red, but you need swamps, basic swamps for the black mana.
Yeah, especially if Blood Moon is part of your game plan.
Yeah.
Then, yeah, that definitely impacts. You're playing more of your off-color basic than your red basic, even if your deck is base red.
Yeah, I do think that, like, decks like that, they don't really care. They're still going to play as many duels as they can, because if they're trying to Blood Moon or Price of Progress you, they're probably going to be fine if it's in play.
Yeah, the exception is, like, if you're on, like, a Blue Moon list playing back to basics.
Yeah, that is an exception.
Then
that's true.
You obviously need basics, because back to basics doesn't care if your duels are just
what color they are.
Yeah, it doesn't care what color they are.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. I think that's kind of it on basics. You want to move on to our non-basics?
Yeah, so we're just going to kind of go through a list in general order of how you should prioritize having non-basics in your deck. Like, once you've decided, okay, this is the number of non-basics I'm going to play, kind of go through this list and be like, all right, I play all of the ones of these that I can, and then all of the ones of these that I can, and just kind of go down the list. But it varies from deck to deck.
Yeah, and I think it's also worth noting that these first 3 are kind of all the same priority.
Well,
okay, that's okay. The first 2, and if not the first 2, then 1 and 3.
Yeah.
I'm just gonna, okay, we should just say them.
Yeah.
So, the first 3 on the list are fetch lands, not necessarily including Prismatic Vista, dual lands, and shock lands.
Yeah.
So, if you have access to all of this, then fetches and duels are going to be your number 1 priority, followed by shocks often. But otherwise, if you don't have access to duels, which many people don't, then fetches and shocks are going to be your primary things you like. That's the immediate include to your land base. And I don't think anyone's unaware of that, really. I think that's pretty known and agreed upon. But I think the things that follow it on this list are maybe more debated.
Yeah, and the remaining things on this list are me and Ash's general opinions. Like, this is not a hard, fast, okay, I need to make sure I'm playing all of these of my colors before I move on to these.
Yeah, I think this is more of an on-average situation. And the specifics of your deck will modify this list. For example, the next one on this list, I think that Nicholas and I both agree are often going to be your next priority, are the fast lands, the ones that come into play if they're your first, second, or third land. And I know I keep talking about it, but 4-color Furiously Nightmare Sawing, I'm not playing all 6 fast lands in the colors, because it doesn't make sense for the way the deck wants to play. So I don't play Blackcleave Cliffs, and I don't play Inspiring Vantage, where I play the green fast lands because I'm trying to play a Mana Dork on 1 most games, but I'm not interested in playing Mardu colors on turn 1 most times.
Yeah, and that's like where you kind of have to look at the deck. Like, what's your game plan? If your game plan is play like a Dork or a Cantrip on turn 1, then you want like the green or the blue fast lands. But if you're like, okay, I don't really need to play any white spells until like turn 4 or 5, then you probably don't need those fast lands as much.
Yeah, like if you're playing 4-color control, no green, you, at least the way I would build it, you probably wouldn't be playing very many white fast lands, because your white is more for your planeswalkers and your wraths. You don't need it. You don't usually need it turn 1.
Yeah, like you want like your blue mana for
You want your
cantrips.
Thoughtseize and your cantrip.
Yeah, I was literally about to say, you want your blue mana for cantrips and your black mana for hand attack.
And your red mana for lightning bolt.
Yeah.
Which you're probably playing more bolts than swords anyways.
Yeah, I mean, you get swords, path, and prismatic ending. Apart from that, your white removal is usually going to be later.
Anyway, after fast lands, Nick, we've talked about these ad nauseum the last year, but triumphs have been amazing in every deck ever.
Well, any deck that can afford to take a turn off. If you are playing like a blitz aggro deck or like a really, really fast combo deck, then you probably don't want the triumphs. But
that's true.
if your deck can afford to, like, if your deck can keep a hand where you're not doing anything turn one, and you're playing fetch lands, then you probably want triumphs.
Yeah, or if it's the kind of thing where you're often doing something turn one, but turn two is usually development turn. Or even if you're holding up interaction, but you might not have to use it, and you're playing with a lot of fetch lands, triumphs can be very powerful because they get to let you fix colors and still hold up interaction.
Yeah, they're also amazing to draw late game if you need to cycle through your deck.
And another huge bonus that these checklands or that these triumphs have provided is prismatic ending and leyline binding. If you're in white, even if you're not playing the colors the triumphs are giving you, you get bonus value out of having triumphs because A, they're just more fetchable lands, so you get to leave your untapped fetchable lands in your deck to draw or fetch later. And B, you get the value of making your prismatic ending, leyline binding, whatever other cards you might play. What's the Painful Truths? Stuff like that.
Yeah, like for like if you're playing a Deathrite Shaman, but your deck is just green, you can still play like a Triumph that makes black for that.
Territorial Kavu.
The Triumphs have also been very, very nice, which we've seen a lot of decks emerging that are just playing like splashing, usually splashing for Oko, Renin 6, or Minskimbu, or
which is its own problem.
Yeah, it's a whole different thing. But the Triumphs have really enabled being able to splash for like single cards or like 2 or 3 cards, because you just like fetch that Triumph out turn 1, and then you just have access to that mana for the rest of the game.
So what's after Triumphs?
Yeah, so this is where the order gets a little bit strange. Next on the list, we have the check lands, which are the ones that come into play untapped if you have a land type of the appropriate land type. And then I'm just going to put all 3 of these in the same kind of category because I think these get a little bit weird.
It gets pretty dependent on your list.
Yeah, so we have the check lands, the pain lands, and then I disagree with this, but Ash has the slow lands with them. I think the check and the pain lands can be pretty interchangeable. I would never play the slow lands in any of my decks, but Ash thinks that they are good.
To clarify, the slow lands are the ones from Midnight Hunt and I guess Crimson Vow, I think, where they come into play untapped if you control at least 2 other lands. So you guys can let us know in the comments or on Twitter or whatever.
Or Discord.
Or Discord. That is where most of the community lies. Let us know what you think, if the slow lands are good or bad. I think they're good. Nicholas thinks they're bad.
Yeah, and
Let us know.
And that's the kind of thing, like, when you're building a mana base for your deck, assuming you're, like, playing the deck pretty consistently, it might be worth throwing them in, even if you think they're bad, and just see how they feel. And if they feel bad, you take them back out. I think that as the name implies, I think that they're too slow. But there could be value in them. Yeah,
and stuff like that decision might be very specific to what you're playing. So, like, I've played a lot of Blue-Eye Control. I have a really good understanding of what feels good and what doesn't in my list. I've played a pretty good amount of 4-color Nightmare Saw, and I know what feels good and what doesn't in my list. But if I were to throw together, like, Grixis Control for a Paperlander or for a week or 2 at weeklies, I haven't had reps and reps and reps on the deck, so I'm not going to have a perfectly tuned mana base necessarily. So a lot of it sometimes just comes down to playing it and fine-tuning your list in your meta.
I was just going to say, once you've hit all of these lands, your mana base is probably just about, and like pretty close to done. But the last land cycle, which goes in a very select few amount of decks, usually only 2-color decks, are the battle lands.
Which, there was a whole thing when they came out what people were going to call them. But just to be clear, these are the ones from Battle for Zendikar that say, if you control 2 basic lands that come into play untapped and they are fetchable. I more put these on the list to bring up that they are playable in that small subcategory of decks, but not most of them. I think they're pretty bad in 3-color decks. You guys can at me, I guess. But now, Nick, we've talked a lot about the colored lands we'll play in our decks, to the ones that are strictly for mana production. Well, asterisks, strictly for mana production. If we don't have duels, I think we kind of agreed that the best thing to do is just kind of shift this whole lift up by 1, ignoring the duel line, and go from there, do the best you can. Sometimes I've seen decks that don't have duels play 1 more Triome than normal, than they maybe would otherwise, just to kind of fill out some of the fetchable land slots so their fetches don't get dead late. But that could be a battle land if you're in a 2-color deck. That has it. But so we've talked a lot about the dual lands, well, not necessarily the true duels, but the lands that make our multiple colors of mana for our decks. But of course, there are other kinds of lands you play. So do you want to talk a little bit about the other things we'll see in Manabases?
Yeah, so the other things that are going to compose your mana bases are your like utility lands and like certain lands that come in tapped, which usually those kind of fall into the same category. So like the things that fall into the tapped lands category are like Triomes, like we've talked about, and the man lands, which now there's quite a few of those, but
some of which aren't even tapped all the time.
Yeah. So generally, tap lands are really bad. Like, you don't want your lands to be coming in tapped. But sometimes the alternate effect that the card provides is worth it. Like the Triomes, obviously, being able to be fetchable so you can kind of time when you get them, and also making 3 colors of mana, as well as being a good late game draw to cycle, make them worth it. And then like the man lands, obviously, just having another win condition in your deck that gets through counter magic and can kind of just sit on the table until you need it, can make some of those sometimes worth it. So those, I would say, these are kind of the cards that are the trickiest to fit into a mana base, because you generally, in some decks you want them, but you really need to figure out how worth it the effect of it coming into tapped, how worth the alternate effect of the card is.
Yeah. I think that oftentimes building your deck in a way that can incorporate specifically man lands is really a metagame decision. Like, I think people, but I don't know if you remember, Nicholas, back when we had a really heavy blue meta, but it wasn't like a combo meta, it was just like a lot of people playing interactive blue decks. Like, I feel like we saw way more man lands then, because people were like, well, my opponent's going to give me time to kill them with this Raging Ravine.
Yeah, and that was the thing. It was a really slow meta, so having a tapped land wasn't that big of a defect, but also a lot of counter magic going around, so being able to play a threat that can't be countered is also quite good.
Yeah. Now, we talked enough about Triomes already, so I think we're good to move on to the utility lands. And I think utility lands has, I think, a very loose definition on average.
Oh, yeah.
My definition of it would be a land that you're not playing it for its proficiency at providing you good mana, and sometimes it doesn't provide you good mana at all, but you're playing it for an additional value you get out of it. Some really obvious ones we talk about all the time are Caracas and Wasteland. Caracas, it does produce white, but oftentimes people who aren't playing white play it anyways, just because they play it as a colorless land that has a very useful effect, which of course is to bounce legendary creatures. And then Wasteland is how you kill Caracas when you're playing legendary creatures.
Yep.
But yeah, some other utility lands that you'll see in a lot of decks are Bajuka Bog, if the deck is willing to take a tap land to remove a graveyard. Urza Saga is, we've talked about it enough, you guys know. Honestly, Urza Saga is less whack. Of utility. It's less of a utility land. It's more of a way of life.
It's more of a win condition than anything. It's
a win condition. It's interaction somehow. Dodges counter magic. Tutor. It's crazy. Field of the Dead is another win condition type of non-basic land, and that, I think it counts as a utility land in some decks, but most decks that are playing it are more playing it as their primary game plan. Honestly,
as one of them, yes.
Yeah, sure. I mean, I guess a lot of the times the quote primary win con is get Primeval Titan in play, let them deal with the Primeval Titan, and then use the Field of the Dead that it got to kill them.
Yeah.
Honestly, I feel like we probably should have mentioned lands decks earlier in the land counts. I feel like the dedicated lands decks are playing over 40 a lot of the time because they're tutoring so many out of their deck.
Yeah, I mean, not a whole lot over 40. Like usually,
probably like 41.
41 is exactly,
I think ones that are trying to like Azusa Crucible, like that's their main thing, or like Fastbond Crucible, they might play more or like change the ones they're playing so there's more fetchable ones. But that's a little specific.
Yeah, and
anyway,
those land decks are also going to be playing more of these utility lands because they're playing a bunch of tutors like Crop Rotation, like Ash was talking about earlier. Crop Rotation really likes to have an assortment of lands to go get to fit any situation. Like a Boseiju in a deck by itself is, or not Boseiju, Bajuka Bog in a deck by itself is not super great because not only do they have to have a graveyard that you care about, but you have to have drawn it in time to deal with that. But when you can tutor it out to deal with the graveyard that's getting out of hand, it gets significantly better.
Yeah, like when we had Seth on here talking about the Rock, he was saying he plays like 3 or 4 land tutors, and Bajuka Bog is one of his many utility lands that he gets with them. Yeah, and a couple more utility lands you'll see. Mystic Sanctuary is a really big one you'll see control decks playing. That's another reason Blue Eye Control plays so many basics, because you don't have as many fetchable duels, and you want to get islands in play for Mystic Sanctuary. And then you just mentioned Boseiju, specifically the new Boseiju who shelters all.
Yes.
Wait, no, is that the one?
Yeah, is it Who Endures?
No, I think Boseiju Who Endures is the old one.
Turning to Google.
Okay, Boseiju, the one with channel.
Yeah, the good one.
And actually, pretty much that entire cycle sees some amount of play in Highlander. If I had to rate them in order of prevalence, I would say Boseiju, Otawara, Aganjo, Takanuma, Sokenzen.
It is Boseiju Who Endures.
Okay. Now, these ones aren't as good with Crop Rotation, but they are good with Sylvan Scrying.
And, Expedition Map.
Yeah, and Expedition Map, or Demonic Tutor, whatever you may tutor them with. But these are lands that, they're not super amazing at producing mana. If you play them, they're just worse than basic lands most of the time. Almost every time, actually. But if you draw them late, they're an uncounterable spell now. Or sometimes if you draw them early.
Yeah.
They can get stifled.
They can be stifled, but that's neither here
so
nor
can
there.
manlands.
Yeah. Yeah.
So, yeah. Depending on what deck you're playing, and how difficult your mana is, you can afford some number of utility lands. And, for example, in Blue Eye Control, because I can't stop bringing that deck up today, I've been playing it a lot recently.
Yeah, I was about to say, are you just today? No, you can't stop bringing that deck up ever, because it is your baby.
It is my baby. It is. But the utility lands you play in Blue Eye Control are Caracas, Wasteland, Field of Ruin, and Mystic Sanctuary, and then usually Colonnade, Celestial Colonnade, and Fairy Conclave, or some number of those 2-man lands. So you don't you don't play a huge number, and you're a deck that has pretty good mana, so it can afford to play more than most decks, I think. So like, if you're looking at like a traditional like Abzan midrange, they don't get to play nearly as many because they have to spend all their lands on making their 3 colors of mana for all of their super intricately costed cards. Man, I want to play Abzan midrange now.
Abzan midrange is super
better
solid.
than Jund.
Not quite that solid. All I'm saying is Abzan midrange has not 3-0'd on Paperlander.
Okay, your Jund midrange deck was 12 other decks rolled up into one.
It was Moist Jund with some lands shenanigans and other shenanigans, but it had Jund in the name.
It did have Jund in the name. It was Jund nominally.
Alright. At some point on a Paperlander, I am going to build normal Jund and you're going to build normal Abzan, and we're going to settle the debate once and for all.
Oh, goodness. I can't... Okay, I think we've established pretty well, if you look at all the Paperlanders, I perform worse on camera than you do.
I mean, but that shouldn't impact the deck. Alright, fine. You get to play... No, never mind. I was going to say you can play Jund, and then I was like, I don't trust anyone else to truly Jund them out.
What you're saying is, if I play Jund, you're not cool with that because you know I'm going to lose and Abzan will win?
The spirit of Jund is within me, and I must be piloting it.
Does that mean we're banning from anyone else, any guests from playing Jund?
Yes. Unless they really, really want to. Alright, you know what? Okay. We're going to do a Paperlander in which there are 2 people playing Jund and 2 people playing Abzan.
This sounds terrible. Wait, are we talking like 100 card clones or...
Not clones, but they have to fit within the Jund midrange and Abzan midrange categories. We can talk about this later. This might be a thing that happens. It might not. Probably not. I
actually really like this idea.
Let us know on Discord or Twitter or the comments or in person if you.
Well, we might make a. Let us know. Wait, what if we just had everybody show up with the exact same deck? What if everybody showed up with Seinfeld?
I would not watch that. Yeah, not only would I wouldn't even watch that. In fact, I probably wouldn't even finish playing that.
I thought you were going to say you wouldn't even show up to record.
I would show up to record, get through the first match, and then toss myself off of a cliff.
Makes sense. All right, we've deviated drastically.
Oh, so very far. Seinfeld has nothing to do with Manabases. If you're playing Seinfeld, your Manabase is tons of basics.
The reason we deviated is because we were pretty much finished with the topic.
Yeah, there's a few other utility lands. Some decks might play Ghost Quarter, Field of Ruin, like we talked about earlier, Tectonic Edge, Dark Depths, Thespian Stage. Make appearances sometimes.
Maze of Ith is a big one. Oh, you know what? Another one we didn't really think about is Urborg and Yavimaya.
Oh yeah, Urborg and Yavimaya.
Those fall into the like fixing your mana category though.
Yeah, but they're weird. There's lots of utility lands that can be played. Find the ones that you think might be good. Try them in your deck and find out if they are good.
Like the Horizon Canopies.
Oh, those definitely should have been in our non-basic cycle. The Canopy lands, I think, probably go hand in hand with the check lands and pain lands at like about that tier
It depends on your deck. It really depends on your deck.
Yeah, faster decks prefer pain lands more than slower decks.
If you are a blue mid-range deck or a control deck, you probably don't want them.
If you're a combo deck or an aggro deck, then you definitely
almost guaranteed do. Almost guaranteed.
Yeah. I'm glad that you mentioned those because I guarantee someone was going to be like, how did you guys not talk about the Canopy lands?
Oh, I guarantee that we have forgotten to talk about some type of lands.
Oh, we definitely have. But
let us know.
Yeah, tear us apart in the comments or Discord or Twitter.
You can tear Nicholas apart. Be nice to me. I'm fragile.
Sure. Treat Ash with love and kindness.
Utmost care. But Nicholas,
Oh, I'll be fine.
Okay, well now you're making me. Okay, listen,
I'm a real man. Ash over here is like wet tissue paper.
Ooh, that's a good one. Wet tissue paper.
Do
you want to talk about what you played this week?
Yeah, I was about to say that's a perfect transition into.
Oh my goodness.
Yeah, so this week I built. So Ash put out a poll for our most recent Paperlander about what decks people wanted him to play, and one of the decks on that list was Temur Broken Cards, which is basically just a Temur mid-range deck that just plays all of the broken cards. Oko, Renin 6, Minskin Boo, Uro, Ragavan, just all of the good ones. And so he didn't end up playing that for the Paperlander, which will probably not be out. Wait, will it be out? It might be out. So. It might be out before this episode. If not,
who's to say?
Foreshadowing that Ash is not playing that deck. But Ash ended up being like, hey, you should just like build it and see what happens. So I threw it together. I have to go to my notes and okay.
Deck is broken.
Yeah. So, well, it is broken. I went 2-1, and the match that I lost to is 4-color initiative. I hate the initiative so very much. Please, if anyone on the council is listening, do something with the initiative. Some points, like at least point White Plume Adventurer. That would at least be a start. But I also had some unfortunate mulligans. I had to mull to 5 both games. Game 1, I think I drew 2 1-landers before I hit my mediocre 5. And then game 2, I drew 2 0-landers before I hit my mediocre 5. And then I just got initiatived into oblivion. There was one game that I had a chance of coming back because I played a True Name Nemesis, and I was like, oh, well, now I can start taking the initiative every turn. And then Questing Beast, and I wept. So I got brutally annihilated that match. Match 2, I was against Grixis Control. Game 1, I became the thing that I hate, and I won off of the back of initiative. I played an Undermountain Adventurer and just initiatived from there and won, because that's what the initiative does. You get it, and
I would like
win.
to interject and say that Nicholas only plays the initiative cards because he knows he has to. He doesn't actually want to.
Oh, yeah. You would think that I would love the initiative because I'm such a creature combo / creature toolbox player, but man, does it just make games boring. Like, it's just not fun. But, I mean, you have to be playing it or you're doing it wrong. So I was playing some initiative cards. I can't wait till they ban it. And then game 2, I won with Minskin Boo because Minskin Boo is whack and on my top 3 favorite Magic card list. It's just amazing.
Luckily, it does lose to Caracas.
Yes, it does.
Kind of. Still does something.
It still does things, just not as many things. And then match 3, I was against Ash on Blue-White Control. And like I said, I'm a real man. He's tissue paper. I'm kidding. No, it was a good match. It was a good match. Game 1, I curved perfectly. I don't remember exactly what it was. I think I did miss turn 1, but after that it was Sylvan Library into Rabble Master into Minskin, some crazy, I just didn't miss a step, and won off of the back of broken cards. Game 2, I was ahead, but he was kind of trading back and forth to the point that I couldn't get super duper far ahead, and then he cast a recall,
No, I cast an Archmage's Charm to dig through 2 and then found Recall.
Sure, yeah. Archmage's Charm into Recall into Mystic Confluence, and then from there he just had a handful of cards and killed me. And then game 3, I was doing fine, playing some cards or whatever. I was maybe a little bit ahead. And then I just cast Bloodbraid Elf and hit Oko. And, I mean, that's so much value. And then I just won.
I honestly, I think I get so tilted from your Bloodbraid Elves because nobody else plays Bloodbraid Elf anymore.
Oh yeah, I was also
every
on,
time
I was also on like Mana Drain and like Counterspell.
Oh,
Not miscalculation, but like I was on Counterspells and removal spells and stuff that you don't want to. I can't play Team or Broken cards and not play Bloodbraid though.
No, I know. I'm just saying your Bloodbraids, they're never even mid. They're always insane.
Because the spirit of the Jund flows through me.
It really does. So I played against the same Grixis mid-range player. And like we kind of looked at it after the match. I lost. We kind of looked at it. We were like he just like drew absolute fire and played super well. And I just couldn't keep up with him, which is unfortunate. I lost a game where I recalled, maybe twice. I don't remember. I think it was just once. And not that recall's supposed to instant win, but against blue decks, it's supposed to be pretty good. But what you gonna do? And then the second game, I think I mulliganed to 5, and it just wasn't even close. In match 2, I went up against black-red aggro, and it was just one of those matches where the aggro deck plays creatures, and then the control deck plays removal spells, and then the aggro deck draws lands. So that went pretty well for me. And then I lost to Nicholas.
Yeah.
I've been on a bit of a losing streak recently, I'm not going to lie. And I would really love to start winning. So
is this your plea to the Magic gods to like start giving you some wins?
Well, I'm just you know, I've forced humility onto people so often in the past. I decided it's time to I myself be humble and admit that I am on a losing streak. I am not amazing. I'm not the best Magic player yet. So I was actually going to request your teamer list.
I will type it up. As a avid creature combo player, I can agree that Ash has forced humility on me way too many times.
Okay, now that you said you're going to type it up, you know we have to link it, right?
All right, I will make sure to type it up and before this video or this recording goes live so that it will be in the description.
Lovely editor of ours. If we forget, please remind us to link this list. Thank you.
All right, I think we have concluded our discussion.
I think so. Thank you again, Rubber Duck Sauce, for prompting this episode. I hope that we explained stuff pretty thoroughly for you.
Yeah, and if there is anybody that has not joined our Discord, I would recommend doing so. You can ask questions like this, and maybe we will do an episode on it.
Or, yeah, we also might just answer the question in the footnotes of the episode as well. Not footnotes, in the ending segment of the episode.
Yeah, or in over Discord. But either
or
way,
over Discord.
We are active on there, and we'll answer questions as well as many other people on the Discord that are quite good Canlander players that are always happy to answer questions, have discussions, talk about
play webcam games.
Yep. It's a great community. I would recommend you join it.
We'd love for you to join. All right. Any other comments?
Thanks for listening.
Thanks for listening, everybody. May you draw lands and spells.
Thanks for listening to this episode of the 10 Points Podcast. And don't forget to count your points.